Report. The Wizards of the Coast Content Creator Summit was a 100% successful event. Status confirmation. Dungeons & Dragons 5e rules update. Perfect. Dungeons & Dragons virtual tabletop development. Perfect. Creator consciousness upload to D&D Beyond. Complete. Thank you for watching. Buy officially licensed Dungeons & Dragons products. End report.
Just kidding, but that's actually what a surprising number of folks in the comments seem to think would happen, just because I made a video about being invited to this summit. And I don't usually like to draw attention to rude comments, but I gotta point out how a couple comments said I must have been paid 30 pieces of silver. Because if you don't get that reference right away, they're saying that I am like the biblical character Judas, who was paid 30 silver pieces by the Roman authorities, in this case Wizards of the Coast, to betray them, or for this metaphor to work, the commenter is Jesus Christ himself, or at least feels like they're going to be executed. What? So if you already don't trust me, just don't watch this video. But I'm going to remind everyone that I was actually present, physically attending this event, and while some of the news you've heard is true and valid and fine, I know I've seen plenty of news about this summit that is just plain wrong, even about basic things like when and where it happened. I'm also not saying that this is the definitive video explaining the objective truth about the WotC Creator Summit. It's just my perspective on it, but it is informed by my first-hand experience, my notes, and a few other excellent summaries from other attendees linked down in the description. To begin with full transparency, let me remind you that we were not even asked to sign NDAs. One more time, I did not sign an NDA from D&D, WotC, Hasbro, nobody. However, part of their safety guidelines requested that we do not publicly share any video recordings from the summit sessions to protect the identities of other attendees who may not want to have been recorded, and this is for good reason. While I only got some rude comments with people calling me a shill and executing people, I guess, some attendees got a lot of hate, including threatening messages, even their personal information exposed online just for saying they got this invite. That's disgusting. So I have a couple clips from my trip, but most of this video is just gonna be me telling you what happened rather than showing it. And wow, we have this summit, the D&D movie, the D&D Direct presentation that some people confused with the summit, and there's just a lot of important D&D specific things happening lately, but after this video, we're gonna get back into some system neutral stuff and some stuff about other games, because I'm Bob, this is where we learn how to have more fun playing all kinds of RPGs together. And you know what? If you're gonna call me a sellout, at least say I'm a sellout for the one tool that all game masters and players can use for basically any role-playing game, dScryb. These days, dScryb is so much more than an online library with thousands of professionally written scenes of descriptive text. They have interactive maps, integration with Foundry VTT, beautiful character illustrations, and even music, sound effects, and atmospheric soundscapes that you can stream directly to the rest of your group. I've been using dScryb since the beginning, and it's amazing to see how they've grown and adapted to the needs of the community. Other RPG companies should take notes. You can access a lot of dScryb's content with a free account, but if you want to sign up, you can save 10% with code BOB and use the affiliate link below so they know who sent you. Alright, my WotC Summit experience really began here at home as I struggled to figure out who else was invited, since prior to my interview with Kyle Brink, I have never once even been contacted by Wizards of the Coast, so I was baffled to be invited to the office in person. If you watched my video going through the email, you know I wasn't even sure the invite was legit because I hadn't heard anything about what seemed like this big important event that you'd expect WotC to be shouting about from the mountaintops, praising their own efforts to connect with the community. But much like their behavior for the first week or so after the OGL leaks began, radio silence. In fact, I think my video about the invitation, which went live a full week after I received the invite, was what broke the news about this summit for a lot of people. So soon after that video, I found out that Ted from Nerd Immersion and Josiah from Dungeon Dad were also invited and going in person. So we started this Discord chat, and then I started hearing about all the flack people were getting on Twitter, and we opened the chat to anyone invited so we could all communicate and try to make sense of things together. And in the 3 or 4 weeks leading up to the summit, around 25 in-person attendees joined this Discord, and I realized that Nerd Immersion, Dungeon Dad, and me were basically the only YouTubers going. By and large, everybody else was an actual play producer, GM, player, cosplayer, etc. And there were also 1 or 2 bloggers and art directors attending in person, but actual play people seemed like the main audience. And at the time, neither I nor most of the attendees, I don't want to speak for them, but I think so, realized WotC's true reasoning behind who they invited. And that confusion is a very important part of this whole story, because it ultimately leads to how the event itself went a little off the rails, but we'll talk about that later. Also leading up to the trip, the event organizers booked our trips. So now it's time to introduce the Shilometer, where for full transparency, I will display just how many silver pieces WotC spent for me to attend this event. And I don't want that to seem like I'm bragging, I just do think sharing that information is valuable. So my flight was a regular class round trip from my home on the East Coast to Seattle, Washington, and the ticket cost WotC $776.40. I had to wake up at 3:30 a.m., but flying is always pretty beautiful, and I was excited, so it was fun. Since I landed around noon Pacific time, I got a sandwich from the airport, then just hung out in the airport for a while to hydrate and stretch. To cover the cost of that sandwich, my other meals, and overpriced Uber rides to and from the airport, WotC sent me a per diem of $385.00. Then I took an Uber, passing a suspiciously named location on the way to the hotel, and the hotel itself was easily the nicest part of the arrangements. Very cool, open atrium, a room with way more space than I needed, and 3 nights there, cost Wizard of the Coast roughly $550, but I couldn't find the exact cost of the room because hotel prices online are weird. And wow, we're nearly capping out the Shilometer already. I must be totally corrupt. Then, about as soon as I arrived at the hotel, I posted up in the atrium to wait for other creators to show up and introduce myself. I hung out there for several hours, talking with people. I got a personal pizza from the hotel restaurant for dinner, and I called it a night, because the time zone change made that day unnaturally long for me. But then, on Monday morning, the day of the summit, I'm so glad I had the foresight to record a clip of myself recapping that first evening and talking about my expectations for the event itself, because you will see how this clip kind of foreshadows the problems that occurred during the actual summit. So right now, it's actually early-ish morning, 6 a.m., on the day of the event. I might not sound it, but I'm actually pretty awake already. And I wanted to recap the events of yesterday evening, particularly because I got to meet almost everybody who's coming to this thing. And by that, I don't just mean meet in person for the first time. Here's what I want to kind of go over with you, is that even though you or I might not know who a lot of these folks are who are out here, today, now going to represent the community and give feedback, I really think that all these people are great. Everybody really seemed to both want to hold WotC accountable for all the OGL stuff that happened, but not just OGL, like all the other things that might not even be on your radar that WotC has done over the last several years, and just really make sure that we're on a good course for 1D&D for the community. Now, I will add that it does make me a little bit more suspect about the goals of this actual summit. Is it, between the two things that we know it is, right? It is both PR statement, PR, people say like apology tour, whatever, and it is to some extent getting feedback from the community. Where it lies between those two, right now I'm leaning a little more toward PR, because if they have these 20 to 25 of us people here, unless they break us into really small groups, we're not actually going to get to say much. I think that's the only way they're going to get good feedback from everybody they actually spent the time and money to bring all the way here. And if they don't do that, then it's more evidence that this was just kind of like trying to please us all, I guess. But all of that is really what I'm gonna find out today. My understanding is in the morning, they're gonna show us a lot of stuff. And then in the afternoon is when we'll actually have the opportunity to just have conversations, with the staff about where we think things are going, where we think they should be going. Essentially, I was surprised at the guest list because many of the attendees were people who have directly spoken out against WotC even prior to the OGL controversy, particularly at times when the company crossed lines regarding accessibility and representation. Also, I was given the impression that we would be shown some things like the VTT and rules update at the office, and then have the afternoon to ask questions and provide feedback. The agenda that they emailed us ahead of time literally just said, morning session at Wizards, afternoon session with Wizards held at hotel, with no solid description or clear details. To the credit of the organizers, they did ask us a few days ahead of time to send our questions, But if you remember from my interview with Kyle, you don't want to send those questions ahead of time unless you want to receive a vague corporate speak answer. So for many of these attendees who are coming with hard questions about accessibility and representation, their fields of expertise within the TTRPG industry, of course, they're not going to send those questions beforehand because they want real answers. Still, I don't want to speak for the other attendees, but the bottom line is that most creators' expectations were here or here, and WotC's plans were over here, and, well, I'll tell you what happened. Monday morning, after I shot that recording and after breakfast at the hotel, some WotC staff met us in the lobby, took attendance, and almost immediately split us into 2 groups. That's right, they immediately split the party. Then they took us on a short trip to the Wizards of the Coast office, where we arrived maybe a minute or 2 late, but then we waited like 20 more minutes for the day to begin. Luckily, the lobby was pretty cool, and I got a good shot with Ted and Josiah in front of their massive Dristo Erden statue. When we got started, the actual first item on the agenda was a surprise. We knew we were receiving some kind of welcome, but we did not know we would be welcomed by none other than the Wizards of the Coast CEO, Cynthia Williams. And even though they told us we couldn't publicly post any video from the summit, they did say this lobby area was fair game, hence the Drist shot. So I recorded audio of Cynthia's welcome. As of recording this video, I'm still waiting for confirmation that it's cool to post it publicly, but if I can post it, it'll be on my second channel, Bob's RPG Radio, linked up in the card and down in the description. This welcome was also when we found out why everything was getting delayed already. The WotC staff were having some technical issues keeping the virtual attendees connected throughout the day. There were about 100 virtual attendees, so obviously that's a big challenge, but it seems like something they should have been able to handle a little more smoothly. I heard from several virtual attendees that the constant outages definitely dampened their experience. One of the virtual attendees, Mike Shea, aka Sly Flourish, has since expressed the idea that in the future, WotC should probably split the virtual and in-person events into 2 separate days, with the virtual one coming first. That way, virtual attendees will be better accommodated, and they get an extra early look at what WotC wants to show to reduce the FOMO of not being at that in-person event, and just to make it a more valuable experience for them. Like with most things that Mike Shea says, I agree 100%. But my in-person experience was very valuable. I loved getting to meet other creators and the staff, and the WotC office itself was beautiful. Cool murals of fantasy artwork, the character statues, and the absolutely epic game room with a gorgeous table, display cases filled with minis and dice, and even chandeliers made of Magic the Gathering cards. Apparently it was the same room where they shot the D&D Direct video of the group playing on the virtual tabletop. But in this cool game room, I had my first session of the summit, where several WotC staff led a presentation about the future of D&D Beyond. And because we were not under NDAs, the future of D&D Beyond is almost as mysterious to me as it is to you. Most of it was just broad statements about goals, and everything was couched in this metaphor of D&D Beyond being like a theme park with lots of fun things to explore. Some of those broad goals are to improve the D&D Beyond mobile app, make the D&D Beyond experience easier for DMs, facilitate the journey from player to DM, help with new player onboarding, and fix a lot of back-end stuff because it's becoming an old website. Probably the biggest actual news from this first presentation was that D&D Beyond will become the main website for D&D, rather than their current webpage on the WotC site, because DDB has about 12 million users and they want to be hosting the content where the people are. There's still no information about how many subscriptions they lost during the OGL controversy. The other huge news about D&D Beyond is that they eventually want to create a marketplace so users can sell their own homebrew content on the site. That has major implications for the tabletop industry, and I don't know if I like it. On one hand, it would make it way easier for people to create and monetize their work, but it could radically expand D&D's monopoly. It would be another way for this one company to control how people not only play the game, but how they create homebrew for their own games, and that just doesn't feel good. Of course, people had a ton of questions about what this will look like, how it will work, how it would run alongside the DM's Guild, and boy oh boy, they couldn't really give us any firm answers. At least half of this session was designated for us to give feedback about D&D Beyond. Unfortunately, the virtual folks got the short end of the stick when it came to hearing and being heard, but there were great suggestions, from new player onboarding to improving the website's accessibility through language translations, different lighting options, and varying the complexity of the character sheet. So during this little Q&A just about D&D Beyond, the summit already started to exhibit this theme of creators providing a lot of great feedback about issues with the game experience, and WotC employees giving mixed responses. A few doing an excellent job, knowing exactly what they're talking about, most giving positive but broad responses, and a few being dismissive. While this realization and tension slowly builds over the course of the day, we need to revisit the Shilometer, because after this first session, they gave us a bunch of random D&D merchandise. I got a copy of Radiant Citadel, which I already own, so my plan is to donate this book to my local library or high school. I got a copy of the new Heist book, which I lost interest in after the OGL stuff, but I know my wife, Grace, wants to read it, then I'd also like to donate this book. I got a sheet of fridge poetry D&D magnets that I probably will use, and a little ampersand magnet that I'm probably going to give away. A sort of fabric map of the Sword Coast that I think was part of a promo for the D&D movie, and I have no idea what you're supposed to do with this. A bar of D&D chocolate that was pretty good, and a notebook of grid paper, which I will actually use. All in all, I estimate this swag cost about $150, nearly reaching the price
of my soul.
And one other moment that was a kind of bad look for WotC is that the virtual attendees were just left hanging at the end of this session, camera on, while in-person attendees were given all this stuff. So the virtual attendees are being mailed the same stuff, but it was really awkward when I found out about it. Then, sometime between sessions, I think, I got to meet Todd Kenreck, who handles... Wow, my cat's really yelling right now. Then, sometime between sessions, I think, I got to meet Todd Kenreck, who handles much of the content direction for the D&D YouTube channel, and probably a lot of other things, and he was incredibly nice. He's actually a big part of the feedback I gave to WotC after all this was over, so I'll tell you about that at the end of the video. Then it was time for the D&D virtual tabletop. In a large conference room, the table loaded with Alienware laptops and cables, myself and around 8 other creators played the same short encounter that we all saw 1 week earlier in the D&D Direct presentation. So yeah, we got to click around and test out some of the basics in a hands-on way, but if you watched D&D Direct, you saw exactly the same stuff that I did. Well, another group of creators did discover some glitches, like being able to stack up the miniatures so they're just floating way above the map, not being able to target one of the monsters with spell attacks, and how rolling too many dice at once crashes the game. They did say that their user interface that we played on is already out of date, and it's still in pre-alpha being tested by WotC employees and their families, but in the next stage, they want to open it up to influencers. So maybe I'd get to see more, but as I've discussed in previous videos, I personally prefer simple VTTs like Owlbear Rodeo. But there was a great question asked for those of you who do invest heavily in VTTs. One creator said, "What's the incentive to use this VTT if they've already invested hundreds of dollars into another one?" And the lead developer, another super nice guy by the way, gave a pretty solid answer. Since their VTT is being developed in tandem with the core rules update, he's already worked with Jeremy Crawford to simplify some unnecessarily complicated game rules so it plays better on the VTT. And no other studio can do that. Besides that though, it seems like the VTT is just going to be a very good looking application that you can only use for one game, versus the new Alchemy RPG VTT that's partnering with Paizo, Free League, and a bunch of other publishers. And much like with the D&D Beyond presentation, the presenters couldn't really give answers to any specific questions about the VTT, mostly restating points from D&D Direct like how it should be playable on computers, phones, and video game consoles. Later in the day, my comment to the developer was that if they have a team of video game developers using a video game engine to produce an application that is playable on video game consoles, they should just embrace the idea that they're using tools and tech from the game industry to make a better virtual D&D experience, rather than insisting that it's not a video game, as if video games are bad. People love video games, and I think this versatility of devices, while still not as cool as playing analog D&D, will allow everyone to try out D&D in a way that simplifies character creation and needing to know all the rules, and they can play with friends and family from around the globe. That's awesome. A couple other things I liked was when their lead developer said their biggest competitor is Google Image Search, as in, they need the GM to be able to create a map in this software about as quickly as it would take to search for and find a map they would use from Google Images. And I liked when he said they want the GM to be able to edit the VTT map on the fly, so the players have an understanding that the map is not set in stone and it doesn't limit the imagination of the group. For example, he said if a player goes, "Is there a window in this room?" they want the GM to be able to almost instantly pop a window onto the wall. Also, he said he wants it to be free for players, acknowledging that if players have to pay for it, GMs probably won't get their group to use it. But right now, they weren't able to tell us really anything about what it'll cost. And speaking of cost, after that session, everyone went back to the hotel for a catered lunch, which I estimate was worth maybe $25 per person on the Shiloh-meter. And then we were all brought into a huge meeting room at the hotel for the afternoon feedback/Q&A session, or so we thought. Turns out we sat down for yet another presentation about the VTT, led by the same developer who we all got to talk with and ask questions that very morning. However, I did learn that the virtual groups did not get to talk to this guy in the morning, but it was incredibly redundant for us in-person attendees. He repeated the same things we all heard in D&D Direct, and which we had all just heard again that morning. And before you say it in the comments, yeah, we all knew this event was going to involve PR, corporate showcase elements, but we were led to believe that we could ask questions and get real answers, and about 2/3 of the way through the schedule, that had not happened yet. So now, seeing how the event was actually unfolding, it became clear. The WotC Content Creator Summit, as executed, maybe not as intended, but as executed, was primarily a showcase for D&D Beyond and the VTT, primarily aimed at actual play producers, most likely in hopes that they will use it on their shows for free advertising. With this overwhelming part of the agenda now totally clear, the folks who flew to Seattle primarily to give feedback and ask WotC hard questions rightfully felt frustrated, and the tension was reaching a peak. Fortunately though, we took a short break here, and when I was walking out of the meeting room, I practically collided with Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins as they were walking in. I got to talk to each one of them individually, and I asked if they signed my PHB, and they did. It was a positive moment for me, because I got to tell these guys how their work in cultivating D&D through 5th edition literally changed my life. If D&D 5th edition wasn't fun, I would have never started this YouTube channel, and I'm glad I got to thank them personally for that. Meanwhile, however, there was a group of in-person attendees who spent the break venting their frustrations to each other about how the summit was simply not unfolding in the way that it was presented to us beforehand. Frankly, I have to chalk this up with the numerous times during the OGL controversy that Wizards of the Coast was just not transparent about their goals and actions, and it's really not cool anymore. They kind of keep fumbling when all they have to do is be honest, and we'll talk about this more when we get to the feedback that I sent them after all this happened. But all of this confusion and frustration came to a head when at the start of the next session, one creator in the room asked, "Why are we here?" And please know that I'm paraphrasing. They were completely professional in how they phrased the question, and yes, they were also courageous in asking this question. I saw some people getting flack about this on Twitter, but I cannot imagine speaking out in a room with dozens of people I don't know, including half a dozen WotC executives and over a dozen D&D designers and other staff, and just calling them out. That took courage, and the real news is that they saved the summit for us creators and for WotC, because the presenters could no longer deny that the afternoon was going very poorly, so they adjusted the schedule. But not so fast. They did try one last time to keep their grip on it. With a fairly condescending tone, one exec pushed that we were finally about to get into the reason we're all here, to talk about, the game. That was actually the tone of voice, and it wasn't cool. Ultimately, I give credit to WotC as a whole here because they did listen. They delayed the next session in favor of an open Q&A where many creators finally were allowed to ask the questions they were led to believe they had been flown here to ask. And the staff even extended this Q&A to try to make sure as many people had their voices heard. However, due to the technical issues and less than ideal moderating of the questions from virtual attendees, they got some not so great treatment once again. And even in person, it didn't go perfectly. Most of these high-level questions about how WotC is working to make the game more accessible and more inclusive for everyone who wants to play, those high-level questions were mostly unknowns to the high-level execs at the event. If answered at all, those questions were answered by the creator relations staff and the diversity, equity, and inclusion staff. That wasn't a great look when many, if not most of the creators there in the room belong to marginalized groups and are well-known advocates for better accessibility and representation in the TTRPG industry. Ultimately, it felt like WotC just did not understand who they invited to this event, and the invitees weren't given an honest chance beforehand to understand why they were invited. So, looking on the bright side, we can call it a learning experience for everyone. And by the way, I'm not trying to lump myself into this genuinely courageous group of advocates pushing against the foundational issues in the culture of D&D, both as a game and as a brand. I was quiet and I listened because this was just not my turn to speak. Then, much like during D&D Direct, our two favorite D&D designers, Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins, were kind of crammed onto the end of the summit to tell us about the rules update. Thankfully, the mood shifted at this point. Crawford kindly and smoothly transitioned from what just happened to where we were about to go, and we did learn some neat things about the game. Just like with the Cynthia Williams welcome message, I recorded audio of this hour-long sneak peek, and if I get the green light to post it, it'll be on my other channel. And if you've watched this far, do remember to give this video a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and even consider picking up a set of my limited edition metal Bob World Builder dice. Out of the original 500, there's only like 100 sets remaining, and you can save 18% with code BOB and the link below. Thank you. Alright, Jeremy Crawford talked about the legacy and importance of D&D and WotC's responsibility, not as the original creators of the game, but as stewards of the game going into the future. He said that WotC will be at more conventions going forward and to connect with content creators and the wider community, and he got into the goals of the core books. The main goal being to make the books easier for new and experienced players to navigate and find the rules they need. So they're adding detailed glossaries and indexes, including one in the DMG covering iconic D&D lore. As Chris Perkins explained, this lore glossary is to share the correct D&D lore to prevent the misinformation that can happen on the internet. The next PHB will walk you through how to play the game before how to make a character, and how to make characters quickly, with optional arrays of ability scores and features for core classes. Both the PHB and the DMG will include guidelines for session zeros and safety tools, and the DMG will include practical tips about the management of a group and a campaign, like what to do when a player doesn't show up, where to find inspiration for homebrew adventures, etc. In a very quick comment, they said the new core books will be released staggered, one at a time, rather than all three at once. I had asked Kyle Brink about this in our interview, and he wasn't sure at the time, but he leaned this way, saying their whole system is really set up for putting out around 200 to 300 pages of material every couple months, whereas the new core books would be like 800 or 900 pages of material all at once, and it just won't work. In fact, Perkins said this new monster manual will be D&D's largest monster manual ever, with around 500 monsters, clearly taking notes from the new Dungeon Denizens monster book published by Goodman Games. It will include many new monsters like high CR creatures for every creature type and scaled NPCs. For example, there's already a low CR cultist stat block in the monster manual now, and they want a cultist type NPC stat block for each tier of play. They said the PHB will have all new art and more art, including unique pieces for all 48 subclasses, confirmed 4 subclasses for each class, and new art for character backgrounds that are literally landscapes and scenes, as in backgrounds you would imagine your character in front of. And they specifically talked about how the monk class, which has traditionally been represented with mostly East Asian influence, will now be represented in artwork and language not specifically East Asian, because there are unarmed martial arts practices from all over the world. Also, the monk's martial art die is getting a boost. Along those lines, Crawford said that all text and concept art now goes through an inclusion review process before anything is published, something they probably learned after Spelljammer. He talked about the 1D&D surveys receiving more responses than the entirety of the original playtest process for D&D 5e, and how they do have people who read all of the written survey feedback, even pointing out one designer who was at the event who reads everything, and everyone gave him a round of applause. On this note, they said the idea of having the druid's wild shape as templates instead of specific creatures was a highly requested idea from feedback on previous surveys, and then it didn't test well in 1D&D, so they're making adjustments. Another interesting note about the surveys was that they always ask what edition of the game you started with, essentially so they can sort responses and look for preferences that are tied to each edition, noting that there are now more people than ever who have come to D&D through 5e than all the other editions. But even that group has a wide range of preferences, so it helps them do their best to appeal to the underlying wants and needs of all groups. Then Crawford talked about edition changes and how everyone really knows 3.5e should have been called 4e because you had to replace your core books. However, they also stand by the idea that this new 2024 set of core books will still be 5e because it's all backwards compatible, unless there's a specific note in the new books about how to make an adjustment, and how Xanathar's and Tasha's content is getting special treatment, and how spells or monsters that didn't seem to match their original power level or challenge rating will be adjusted to actually match their original level or challenge rating. Basically, any spell that seemed too weak for its level would become more powerful to match that original level, rather than changing the level itself, but they are making those changes. Crawford also said that the next Unearthed Arcana article will contain all 6 of the remaining classes and new weapon options, namely Weapon Mastery. This was a feature from previous editions that I think exists in Pathfinder as well, and the underlying idea is giving martial classes more to do, and the way it works is that martial classes are able to train in specific weapons and unlock new cantrip-like properties for mastered weapons. If this sounds familiar, I made multiple videos last year about my own 5e weapon system project full of new features for each weapon, but I ultimately abandoned that around the time of the OGL controversy. They talked about a few specific weapon properties, but they're all going to be in the next Unearthed Arcana like any day now, so you'll see them very soon. And the last bit about the UA that they talked about was how Warlocks will choose a Baby Pact, I don't think that's what it's actually called, but it's what Crawford called it, at first level, and how a Warlock's Pact will determine their spellcasting ability. And then at the end, Kyle Brink stated that all these rules changes will be added to the SRD. So the good news is, allegedly, if you don't want to spend $150 on these new core rules, then apparently you don't need to, because it's just 5e, so all the rules should be free in the SRD under Creative Commons. I hope they actually follow through on that. And Planescape is getting the Spelljammer treatment with 3 small books in a box set. But then, after several hours of presentations, we practically got kicked out of the hotel meeting room because we stayed in there for like an hour longer than we were supposed to. And now, the games began, as we were all told dinner would be held at a local restaurant/game store, but we would have to figure out our own transportation for this part, so they gave each of us an additional $50 Uber gift card, adding that to the Shilometer, and it was kind of a free-for-all as everyone scrambled into pairs and groups to share rides. As for the price of the dinner, I have no idea, but I imagine it cost them at least $50 per person because it was a nice buffet and included 2 free drink tickets, which I did not use, by the way, so I was dined, but I was not wined at any point on this trip. And the dinner was great. I sat with the senior VP of Dungeons & Dragons, Dan Rawson, and we talked about how each of us got started with the game and talked about our careers. I wish I got to talk with Chris Perkins or Jeremy Crawford or Todd Kenreck or even Cynthia Williams, who was there too. But as an introvert, this day was already completely exhausting, and being packed into a loud dining room did not help, so I spent probably an hour and a half just browsing the game store. Because they gave each one of us a $50 gift card for the store to buy whatever we wanted. I bought some dice and a cool pin for my wife, and they didn't really have any Dungeon Crawl Classic stuff, which was a bummer, but I did find this absolutely sick basic D&D lunchbox that came with a thermos inside clunking around in there. And that brings our Shilometer to a total of $2,036.40. Fortunately, I'm guessing that if you've watched this far, you understand that I don't pay my rent in plane tickets and lunchboxes, so while the free travel was amazing, and the meals were pretty great, and the gifts were nice, I was literally not bought out by Wizards of the Coast at this summit. After all that, most of us had one more day in Seattle, so being a total tourist, I went to see some big building called the Space Noodle. I don't know, it was pretty tall, and when I was in line, an employee recognized me, and was super excited about it, and that's only the 4th time I've ever been recognized in public, so that was another highlight of the trip. And on the last night at the hotel, I hung out with Ted, Josiah, and some other creators for a while, ate the rest of my leftover pizza from the first night, and then we played a riveting game of D&D Trivial Pursuit with some of those creators, and Celeste Konowich, lead designer of Kobold Press's new game, Tales of the Valiant. Networking? Then the true final day of the trip was all travel. I got home very late, completely exhausted, and I started thinking about what I learned from this experience. Personally, my main takeaway was that I need to go to more in-person events because the most fun I had the entire time was just meeting and talking with other creators and with the developers and designers. But a couple days ago, we got a survey from WotC to give them feedback. And the first thing I told them was how smaller group sessions would be great because it kind of forces everyone to introduce themselves, whereas this large group setting really puts the onus on us as individual guests to introduce ourselves to each other and to any of the WotC staff. But their survey also asked this great question. What impact, if any, did the Content Creator Summit have on your opinion of Wizards of the Coast? And I said, it reinforced my opinion that WotC may be trying to connect with creators in the community, but they still don't know how to do it without upsetting a non-negligible number of people. Transparency is the word that gets thrown around with every new WotC post or event, yet it's not there. Transparency is the answer to almost all of these problems, but WotC seems to refuse to be genuinely transparent. I'm aware I may be subject to bias on that front after the OGL controversy, but in those high-level and now low-level ways, it's still not there. For example, a clear itinerary and more transparent messaging that this event was to be mostly a VTT showcase for actual play producers would have saved the summit. But the itinerary was unclear, and the messaging was that we were there to provide feedback and also get sneak peeks of the VTT and core rules update. Transparency is key. And their last question was, what do you want to see Wizards do going forward? So first, I reiterated, as I said above, just actually be transparent about their intentions, reasoning, and methods when attempting to connect with the community. I know WotC has said during the OGL and now Summit invitation controversies that they wanted to keep quiet rather than stir the pot, but the silence is a lack of transparency and it's becoming hypocritical. I want to see the general opinion and my own opinion of WotC improve. For me, making connections with the staff helped a lot. I think the public needs more reminders that WotC is just people, without going too heavy on the "hey fellow gamers" messaging. Have Kenreck interview more staff about what they are working on and why, aka be transparent, just like he does with Crawford for the UA updates. There should be videos like that with the DDB dev team, the VTT dev team, and the DEI team, and even with Cynthia about the direction of the game/brand. Basically, the community will never connect to WotC because people need to connect to people. And much like the commenters who called me a shill, I think my feedback was more harshly worded in text than I would have said in person, but in this case, I'm glad they gave us the opportunity to submit written feedback because that is how I feel. It's a shame that to a large extent this summit was, as executed, supposed to be primarily a PR showcase for the VTT, and when they couldn't hardly answer any questions about it, it just made it seem rushed. But after everything, this summit was an opportunity that never in a million years would I have expected to come to me when I started this YouTube channel. Getting to see the office where D&D is made and meeting designers like Crawford and Perkins and that cool guy Justice Arman who I mentioned in the email video, all of it was pretty surreal. And it is not lost on me that while I worked very hard to build this channel over the last 4 years, it is because of you and your support, and in a huge way, the support of all the Bob World Builder patrons that really made this opportunity possible for me. So as grateful as I am for the event organizers who put me on the list, I have to thank you for all your support over the years to make this happen. So thank you, and keep building. I mean, keep building. Okay.